Welcome back to We Still Like Each Other, the podcast. My name's Travis.
And I'm Stephanie.
And this is the podcast where we show that the honeymoon stage can last forever.
Why you said it like that?
Because when you take a week off, it's crazy. Like
you have so much guilt over it.
I do. This
It's
is
okay.
Yeah. You know how I feel about even when we first met me. Like Travis takes work serious.
Yeah. Your work ethic.
If he's on time, he's late.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about this podcast.
Your work ethic has definitely transferred over to this podcast. It's like his second job.
I remember last week when you're like, "Are we recording?" I was like, "No."
And I said it kind of like with an attitude because there were other things. He was really sick. But you know how I am. Sometimes I'm like, yo, men be over exaggerating when they're sick. So he like wanted to cancel something else or whatever. And I said, are we still recording the podcast? Thinking he was going to say yeah. And he was like, no. I was like, oh shit, he's really sick.
And you know, we never spoke about that, but I knew it was like the alley-oop. Like if I said, yeah, of course, he'd be like, oh, so we could do the podcast.
But we can't do X, Y, and Z.
I knew it. We never spoken about that.
And I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah, it was a little spicy week.
Yeah. But we're back. We're here.
We're back.
It's been a crazy couple of weeks. Right before Travis was really sick that we had to cancel the episode. We were in Florida for a week. And we had a great time at the core of it, but a lot of shit went wrong.
Yeah.
Even before we left, a lot of shit went wrong.
Was it microwave?
Retrograde in the microwave.
Yeah.
Mercury in the retrograde.
I still don't believe in it, but
on Patreon 2 episodes ago, Christina, redhead Christina, she mentioned it and we all clowning her or whatever. And then it's like the universe was like, oh, you want to see what I could do?
Watch me flex my powers.
And honestly, it's been a rough couple of weeks for us and we're still dealing with shit. Yeah. So I don't know what it is. Like something's happening that is just pushing us.
Is it still happening?
I don't know if Mercury in retrograde is still happening, but I know that we just keep encountering some shit. Like, but we're all right.
Yeah, we're gonna be stronger.
We're gonna get through it. Y'all need to go on Patreon and listen to the last interactive recap just to hear about the whole Florida trip. Our friends Tab and Pete Fields, they are on it with us and they talk about how insane our week in Florida was. The episode before this that we did get to record, there was a commercial break.
It was a intermission because our conversation went left. Mm-hmm. And y'all know, I'll keep most things. Honestly, that's the only thing in the history of this podcast that I cut out. Yeah. For the most part, I'm like, let it run.
Yeah. One take shorties.
Yeah. But that felt a little too like, what was our slogan? Like real raw.
Yeah. It was just too, like the conversation, I don't think it was beneficial to anyone.
Yeah.
Like sometimes when we'll have a disagreement on the show, I feel like it's a learning moment for our listeners. And I just felt like it was a very poor representation of who you are. And it didn't need to be in there.
I feel like it's sounding a way spicier than it is.
In his defense, part of what I think makes this show great is that we kind of battle each other, right? We push each other to kind of think a little more critically, to see the other person's side. And it helps so many relationship topics be nuanced to people, right? It's not black and white.
Yeah.
We're flexible. We kind of like to see the other person's perspective.
Yeah, I always start. There's plenty of examples I could think of where I start thinking one way and by the end of it, I'm like, I can see that.
But it wasn't without questioning, without pushing, without mentioning your perspective, right? And vice versa. So I feel like in that moment, you kind of were trying to make it one of those moments, one of those pod moments, one of those deep moments, and you just challenged me for the sake of challenging me, and it was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it was a true representation of how you felt. I think it was one of those moments where getting into your podcast bag went wrong.
Yeah, I own it, and I've apologized, and we've had those tough conversations, and we just have to move on. But yeah, that's what that was about. And I think we kind of briefly spoke about it on Patreon.
On Patreon,
nothing too crazy. Like I didn't add the clip or anything like that, but we spoke about it.
But a reminder that now the $3 tier on Patreon, so even if you only donate $3 a month, you get the interactive recaps. You get to participate in them, which is live through Zoom, or you could just listen to them afterwards or watch them afterwards. So if for $3, you could go join right now and you'll get all of the 8 interactive recaps. 9. There's 9? Okay, all of the 9 interactive recaps that we've done. And you make a little donation to us too, which is greatly appreciated.
Yes, sir.
Before we get into the Did You Know, I wanted to talk about 2 things. We were so inspired by the Quien Tu Eres podcast event in New York. It was right when we got back from Florida. Travis was already starting to feel sick, but we were like, we need to go. Like it just felt like a good moment.
Literally, we took the train from Jersey to the city. And before we got out from the train station, we went to like one of those stores in the train, got a Dayquil, cough drops, and some water.
Yeah.
Like I'm like,
it wasn't COVID. He didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
We tested for COVID. It was just a bad cold.
And it was like, I got to push through. So, and that's something we knew we were going to attend even before we went on our flight to Florida. So it was like, Florida, get back, get dressed, go.
And I'm so happy we went because it's a pretty new podcast like ours. And he basically had this huge event at Samsung that was just so inspiring. Like, it's goals for real.
Yeah, it was like, yo, we can do this.
We can do this. And the whole podcast is about professionalism, representation, and like the Latino community in professional spaces. So it was relatable as well. We bumped into people who listened to the show there. I have an embarrassing story to tell. At the very end of the podcast recording, like you could tell they were wrapping up. I was like, let me walk to the bar now before it gets crowded. As I'm walking to the bar, we bump into a listener who's this very flamboyant gay man, and he was so excited to see us, and then it made me so excited. So we're like,
well, hold on. Before I got excited, he goes, I love the podcast. You don't be taking his shit. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yep, exactly. And then, so of course we get into that, oh my God, like excitement without realizing like how fucking loud we were. And while the podcast was still finishing.
And the security's like, you need to bring it down.
And then you hear the girl on the mic say, thank you very much. Like, y'all shut them up. I was like, oh, I literally wanted to dig a hole and like go through to the other side of the earth. I was so embarrassed.
It was an honest moment.
It was. And the whole event was about being authentic and being your true self and not toning down who you are for the sake of professionalism. So if it was any better place in the world, it was a teachable moment. It was also the perfect place to make that kind of embarrassing mistake. Yeah. I forgot to mention, we bumped into someone at the airport.
We get to Florida and we're waiting for our friends to pick us up. And someone's like, I love your podcast. I'm like, the fuck?
Yeah. It was so cute. And then her boyfriend was like, do you want a picture with them? And she was like, yes. I was like, ah.
And she told us her name. I introduced myself to the boyfriend and I can't remember. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's been a crazy couple of weeks.
But I was like, oh, she's going to tag us immediately.
You didn't. So we want that picture. Post it or send it to us.
Yeah, we'll post it.
We'll post if you want, with your permission.
Yeah, so that was cool.
It was really cool. And it was cool because Eli was there and was watching and he was kind of excited. Like, oh, he said they're fans of the podcast. It was
and
so
even
cute.
Back to the event that we went to, outside of that one guy, there was a few people who were more discreet. Like, yo, I love the podcast. Or I love your TikTok.
Mm-hmm. Or like, I watch with my girlfriend, or my girlfriend makes me watch it.
So it's cool, like, being in these streets, touching the people.
Not touching the people. All right, baby.
Yes.
Are you ready for Did You Know?
I am ready for Did You Know. Did you know? Did you know women often feel loved when talking face to face with their partner? Men, on the other hand, often feel emotionally close when they work, play, or talk side by side.
Whoa.
And it got me thinking. I think there's some truth to this, right?
Okay.
I know when the other day, me and you were sitting at the table across from each other and just talking. You were like doing stuff on your laptop. I could tell you were like in your safe place, like you felt loved. And for me, if I'm just on the computer and I could feel your aura, mm-hmm. I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a perfect example of that.
But does that mean that you don't enjoy that face-to-face time?
I do, but I don't think it's as necessary as it is for you.
Oh, wow. He just said he don't want to be all up in my face.
No, I enjoy it, but it's not like I'll be thinking like, damn, we haven't had a conversation nose to nose in a while.
Yeah, I was thinking more sitting at a restaurant face-to-face versus right next to each other. Which do you prefer?
We've done both. We've been that couple.
Yeah.
I guess it depends. I guess it depends on the goal of going out to eat. Sometimes the goal is just to eat, and sometimes you want to like have some conversations, and I feel like face to face is a little easier.
Like I like being next to you because like body heat and physical touch, you could like put your arm around me. But when it's time to eat, like you got broad ass shoulders, your elbows be all up in my face. In my space, and I'm like, I'd rather be in front of you.
Yeah.
So it depends. I also don't like being face to face in bed because you be breathing up all my air.
Since day one.
I'm like, I need my own air.
I'm like, I know I got some big nostrils.
No, for real, you literally suck up the room. Okay, I think that makes sense, but I feel like it speaks to men's inability to like face their emotions, like be that vulnerable with them, if that makes sense.
I think it's just showing that we're a little bit more low maintenance.
No, I took it differently. I took it more so sometimes people have trouble with face-to-face contact or eye contact, period, like just in social settings, right? And it speaks to them being a little bit more reserved, a little bit closed off, and a lot less vulnerable. So I think it being side to side, like, I got you, babe, versus like, I got you, babe, looking at you, like they're a little more afraid of doing that.
Okay.
I think it speaks to their fear of being too open. And again, this is like generalizing. I don't think it's all men, but I think there is a pattern that we can, acknowledge.
Yeah, feelings are soft.
Yeah, or they're just not used to it. If you're not used to having to be emotional all of your childhood, and now you're an adult and meet this person who is more open with their feelings, it's not going to be a switch. So maybe it's like, I got you, but I can't look you in the eye when we're being so open. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
You ever got that vibe from me?
No, I think you're very open when I'm opening you up. Hey, yo, that sounded crazy. You're very open when I ask. Like, if I'm asking you a question or we're having a deep conversation, like, you're not afraid to, like, pour it all out. And I really appreciate that from you. I do feel, though, that there's things that you just won't ever bring up if I don't bring it up.
Peace, baby.
Like, it's rare that you're just opening up emotionally, like, unprovoked, if that makes sense.
Yes, but once we're there, I'm open.
Once we're there, like, I don't think you're afraid to open up.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think in recent times we've mentioned it, like, you been like, all right, I need to talk, and you'll start off something, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's tough. And we've discussed this plenty of times, but really quick, I just feel like for me, in my head, it's like everything is okay right now without me bringing this up. Why start this turmoil? And it's not that I'm afraid that you're going to do anything or be angry, but it's just, it's, I don't know. I feel like it's protecting the peace, but maybe that's not always healthy.
It's not, because I feel like you not talking about it doesn't erase it. Mm-hmm. I feel like you're jamming it into a bottle, and then eventually the pressure is going to fucking blow.
Yeah.
I know for me, it just reminded me of like a discussion we had recently, but I sometimes, I'm working on my reactivity or letting certain things go, and, not being so individualistic and like looking at things from a relationship standpoint. So there's some shit I just don't need to say. But it's so easy for me that if I do that a few times, my pressure pops. So your threshold for blowing up is probably a lot stronger than mine, a lot bigger than mine. But I know for me, like if I let a few things go too many times in a row, I'm like, motherfucker. I was trying to hold it all in.
Shit, my threshold probably could pack in some years.
Yeah.
Years is like a week.
And honestly, which one's worse? Like, okay, a week's worth of things blew up. Yeah. Imagine a few years.
That's why people need therapy.
Imagine a few years worth of shit blowing up. Mm-hmm. And you're like, I thought you were fine. How do you handle that when you finally blow up years later? And I probably have disconnected from so many things that happened because I addressed them in the moment.
Yeah. Whereas
you were holding on to it for years and years and years. I'm not saying my way is right. It's probably toxic as fuck too.
But I think it's very clear to anyone that my way isn't. Like, there's no way to justify that, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll figure it out and we'll get back to you.
Kiara called.
All right. So in speaking of that, Danielle, one of our patrons, submitted a topic for us.
Oh, I'm doing work.
Yeah, you're doing work. You're crediting her as a producer for this episode. And she asked about healing our inner child. What is the inner child? And do you think that being in a relationship with the right person can heal your inner child? So I guess let's start with, what is the inner child to you?
That's a good one. I just think that's, for a lot of people, the person you kind of quiet as you get older, like that voice in your head that no longer just works in the current state of your life. Like, I can't be that childhood Travis anymore because it just doesn't serve me anymore. At this grown age, it doesn't.
Do you feel like when you say it doesn't serve you, do you mean like because it's immature or because you no longer need who you were as a child in your adulthood?
I think it shows up. Like, I definitely think my childhood shows up in my adulthood. There are things that I've probably been doing for decades at this point, and
that you should have stopped.
Maybe.
Okay.
And so we're always, even though we don't say things out loud, a lot of times we're aware of things, right?
Mm-hmm. Like what?
Like, I'm this way because X, Y, and Z.
Oh, okay.
Even if I don't want to face it, it's the reality of the situation.
I feel like sometimes we don't know it. Like sometimes we think we're the way we are because it's an innate quality and we don't connect it to our childhood and our parenting or the things we experienced as children that made us that way.
Yeah. And, to be fair, yeah, I agree. I think, to be fair, it's only as of late that I'm like maybe running through that in my head. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe I'm this way because this, or even things you tell me, and, we're going to get into it in a few, but you'll hit me with a quote and I'm just like,
damn, that's me.
Like it floors me.
So since you brought that up, the reason that happens is because when we think about trauma and childhood trauma, many of us probably feel like, I didn't have childhood trauma. I wasn't abused physically. I wasn't abused sexually. I had a roof over my head. I ate meals. I went to school. I had clean clothes. And a lot of us think, my childhood was fine. But there are so many other things that could be considered trauma when you think about relationships, right? If you've noticed in our show, when we talk about relationship issues in terms of our intimate relationships, so many times I'm like, this reminds me of me and Eli, or how I parent, how I mother, right? Relationships are relationships, right? So I draw connections between how we work on each other, between my friendships, how I am with my children, right? So when we think about our childhood relationships, and we really think about their nature, we can think of how now that helps us or hurts us in our intimate relationships as well, right? So maybe some examples that I'm going to bring up because of this book I'm reading are maybe you became a second parent, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll use myself as an example. As a child, I was the eldest of 5 children. And I was praised for being quote unquote mature and being able to help. I was bathing kids, helping, taking them to school, picking them up. And I never in my childhood, maybe a few times, you feel like, I don't want to do this shit. But for the most part, I would have defended my mom and felt like she works hard and I'm mature, so I get to help her. Mm-hmm. Like, I kind of felt like a hero, or like I was put on this pedestal. But now as an adult, it's like, that's traumatic in a sense. It was taking away some of my childhood, and being put on a pedestal probably gave me some negative qualities, right? Like, it made me too bossy with my friends in school because at home I was a mom, right? So now at school, I needed that same type of control, and maybe lost some friends, or people thought I was a fucking bitch because of it. You know what I'm saying? And
in comparison, I think you mentioned it was like around 8, right?
What?
That you were starting to like take care of your siblings?
Probably younger, because so I have a younger sister that we're like about 2 years apart, but then I have a brother who's 6 years younger than me. And I have memories of people joking around and saying he was my son. And I felt proud of it. Like, oh, he's like my baby. I was 6, bro. Like, but at the time, it felt like a badge of honor.
But I was going to say, think about Eli.
Yeah, I can't picture Eli. Eli's 8, and I can't really put responsibilities on him to parent.
Like right now, Eli's hanging out with River while we do this pod. Mm-hmm. That's the extent of where we'll allow him to.
He can't make him a bottle. He can't change his diaper.
Bathe
he can't
him.
Put clothes on him. He can't sleep in the same bed with him. Like, there's so many things that just can't happen. But and I do want to make this statement, this disclaimer, that like, my mother is one of my best friends. I love her to death. And when I speak about my childhood and I reflect on these things, I have no hate or anger towards her. And it's just me doing my own healing and going through it. But it's not ever like my mom fucked up and she should have done X, Y, and Z.
But I know and I 100% believe you, but is there part of you that you do want to have those tough conversations with your mother? Of course.
I want to have the conversations more so just to help me in my own motherhood. I want to get to know her a little bit more intimately about her childhood, because these things are generational. Cycle. It's generational trauma. It's passed on. It's a legacy, right? And the only way to change that legacy is to know your history, right? So I do want to have those conversations, but with grace, yeah. So back to that. So the inner child, to me, I'm reading this book by Terrence Real. It's called Getting Past You to Build a More Loving Relationship, Us, right? And the first chapter is about what Danielle was referring to, the inner child, if it's healed, but he talks about it as the adaptive child, right? In the past, I've talked about maladaptive behaviors, right? So things we might have needed to do in our childhood for survival that now don't serve us in our romantic relationships, right? So I needed to be bossy and strong and all these things because I was helping my mom parent her children. And in the moment, it worked. Me being that way with my friends, with you, is going to do the opposite, right? So it's maladaptive. It's going to leave me lonely, right? So he talks about the adaptive child and how our childhood traumas bring that side of us. We're not in our wise adult self, he mentions. We're in our adaptive child. So that's the stuff that needs to be healed, right? Or the stuff that needs to be acknowledged and understood so that we can show up better and show up as our adult selves in our relationships. But when I think of inner child, I think there's something about preserving that inner child. And I think about the positive about your childhood.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, like, it's the part of us we suppress, right? I think of our inner child, like our curious selves, our creative selves, the part of us that's more loving, forgiving, more flexible, right? Because we're not tainted by like society standards.
I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
But, and all those things, like forgiving and flexible, I also think it could lead to a lot of, you could be let down a lot because of that, a lot of the reasons why we have like daddy issues, mommy issues is because, to us, they're gods, they're our superheroes, so they could do no wrong. But it's when you get to our grown age that we're reflecting it, like, you motherfucker, you did a lot wrong. And that's why I have to let go of that inner child, because he was too forgiving and too understanding.
Okay, and that's where I push back. Like, we can't put how our parents let us down. Now we can't generalize and say everyone in our life is going to let us down.
No. But look at your age. Like, you still want to have some tough conversations with your mom. At 32. You should have been able to have tough conversations with your mom at 22. You know what I'm saying?
Not really. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the resources that I have now. Even in reading this book, I'm more equipped to have those conversations now than if I would have done it 10 years ago. So when I talk about the inner child, the good stuff, I think about us in Florida. If you're watching on YouTube, I have like this twisted little braid thing on my hair, right? It's something that as a kid, I would have always wanted. And my mom worked hard and did her best to like give us certain experiences, but money was tight, right? So getting this braid, and then I had 3 other sisters, it was just something that didn't make sense financially for my mom to do for us. We were in Universal, and I was like, I want this braid. I always wanted it as a kid, That's me, like, nurturing my inner child, like little things like that. Being a little more curious, spontaneous, whereas in adulthood, we kind of have to be more realistic, right? And take less risk because there's more at stake. So when I think of the inner child, I think our relationships can help us nurture it, bring it out, and kind of feed it, right? But when we think about the adaptive child, that's the more negative stuff. That's the part of us that needed to survive our childhood or needed to get through our childhood. And we might have some not so wanted behaviors that come from our adaptive child. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I feel like that language helps us differentiate between the two. Like, one is good and one is not so good.
Yeah, I get you.
What I was going to say. So something from the book that I wanted to bring up is that this therapist, he's a relationship expert. He says that our partners are not responsible for healing our adaptive child.
I agree.
And I feel like for me, especially earlier on in our relationship, and maybe not so long ago too, I wanted you to like fill voids that I didn't have in my childhood. The first example that comes to mind is I was very like free to do what I wanted. I didn't have as much limits as I needed as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. Like, my mom didn't really know what was going on in school. Like, I kind of just did it on my own. And that, unfortunately, allowed me to fuck up with no one noticing, right? Or no one holding me accountable or motivating me to do shit. And I feel like sometimes I set high goals for myself. And when I don't meet them, I'm like, babe, why didn't you like remind me? Why didn't you push me? Like, I needed you to be there to tell me to do this. But it's like, you're not my dad.
Yeah, you're giving me some PTSD right now because, in the moment, those conversations, like, I feel for you. So maybe my toxic trait was just quick to apologize and how can we make this work and it won't happen again and I got you. It's me and you. But it's like,
but there's a balance, right? Because it is me and you, and it's a partnership, and there is some type of accountability that we have to hold for one another.
Yeah, but it's also, you want to help people who help themselves too. Like you hold me down. Like, I don't know, you'll wake up in the morning because you see like, here's my hardworking husband. He's going to go out into this world and earn for us. So let me support him in that way. But if I was just like always rolling out of bed late, not giving a fuck, or you hear me at work like, oh yeah, I didn't do shit today. Fuck those people. You would just be like, I'm not motivated to help you.
Yeah.
So the same can be true for like those goals you had back then, where it's like, for me, it was like kind of like out of sight, out of mind, where I'm like, I'm not really hearing about these things. So
I can't support her in something she's not even talking about herself. Yeah. And that quote you just said, like, you can't help someone who's not helping themselves, is something my dad said a lot, right? And I do believe it to be true as adults, though. I feel like in my childhood specifically, I needed help, even if I wasn't helping myself. Like, I needed to be parented.
The same rules don't apply.
Yeah, because you're not fully developed. You're not your adult self. You're a child. You need guidance. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I feel like I was basically forced to be independent and, pull myself up way too young. And then I found myself kind of expecting you to be that like push for me. And I also found myself maybe setting way too many goals at once, not being realistic because I kind of never had guidance. I had to figure it out myself. And it wasn't fair of me to expect you to be that missing piece. Something else that this author talks about that's important is that trauma manifests in us in different ways, right? And one way is we resist it, right? So like, for example, I'm going to use myself as an example. Like, I felt like I had way too much responsibility as a kid, right? So if I'm resisting that in my mothering, Eli does nothing. I kind of coddle him way too much. I do everything for him. I'm like, he needs to be a child, but then I could hurt him in that way, right? Like, not allowing him to mature. Or I could model it. I could be the same way. Like, it made me a tough person. This was my life, my childhood. Life isn't going to be easy. So you got to get it just as hard as I got it. You got to clean this, do X, Y, and Z. And you need to do your homework because you were the one in school. I wasn't there. I'm not going to check your book bag. If you don't do your homework, that's on you.
Yeah.
So there's two extremes, right? We kind of repeat the cycles, or we resist it with all our might. And honestly, both of them are toxic. Like, there needs to be
a middle ground.
So we have to look into our trauma, whatever that may be. And if in the book, it kind of asks you questions that kind of push you to actually reflect. And I think it's important. Go ahead.
I was going to say, would you say there's levels to trauma? Because I feel like, I'm 34 now. And when I used to look back on my life, I had it easy, man. Like, I always had a room, always had my own room. Like, that's a big deal, right? Always lived in a house, which, in hindsight is like whatever. But at the time, I felt like I had privilege because I wasn't like on top of so many people. Like, you
didn't have to go through the projects.
Exactly. As a kid, I feared the projects.
Yeah.
But then, at this age, I look back on certain things. I'm like, I didn't realize how much it was fucking me up. So my original question, like, do you think there's levels to trauma? Because then you have like, there's kids who are being beaten and sexually abused, but then there's me who didn't have any of those things, but I still say I have quote unquote trauma.
Well, don't quote unquote it, right? Because trauma is trauma, right? There's relational trauma, which is not those harsh, abusive ones, but a pattern in a relationship for 18 years of your childhood that's going to impact how you show up in the world. It's still trauma, right? In the book, the author mentions one of his clients, right, who was sexually assaulted by an aunt, right? But what's impacting his relationship isn't the sexual assault. It's the fact that he was neglected by his mom. So he was never able to open up and confide in her and tell her what happened to him. She was so closed off and distant and busy and not knowing what was going on with him. He felt so abandoned. That's the trauma that's impacting his life, not the sexual assault. Because the sexual assault in his mind, it's like, it's wrong, it's there. He's not repeating it.
Yeah, like he knows.
He's not super hypersexual or 100% closed off to sex. It was like a moment in his life that he know was wrong. But the trauma is the fact that he had no one to confide in, to talk about it with. The fact that his mom had no clue it happened because she was so out of touch with him.
Yeah.
That was the trauma. So even if he wasn't sexually assaulted,
the trauma is that
the abandonment.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? So us quote unquoting and like dismissing our relational trauma as not that big of a deal is going to hold us back from being better to our romantic partners, our friends, our children, all the relationships that we create. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to acknowledge them. Can you think of like an adaptive child quality that now you can connect to your childhood? Like for me, the example was being too bossy. And I think I was put on a pedestal. I had to be bossy in my home. So then it translated negatively in my other relationships.
Yeah. I think I was put on a pedestal for being able to like play by myself, stay in my room, not be problematic, not, being like very
small, easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Very easy to deal with. Never having to worry. Don't have to worry about Travis.
And how did that negatively affect you?
I just felt like it became like a defense mechanism. Like my safe place was just being by myself. Like even in relationships, I was just like, I just needed like a small little square footage of like my computer, and I could close myself off from the world, and that was okay to me. And a lot of that is very similar to my childhood. Like that door was closed, and I was just to myself in my own world.
That reminds me of someone in this story, in this book. So he talks about how to his mom, he was like this perfect kid. He was closed off. Like to her, he never did anything wrong. But because of that, he got away with so much. Like he was sneaking around with girls, dipping into drugs and alcohol. But because he was put on this pedestal as like such a good boy, no one ever knew.
Yeah.
Do you have any like similar, can you relate to that at all?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest example I think is just women. As closed off as I was, I definitely wasn't closing myself off to women, but I also wasn't held accountable for how I handled myself with women. And it wasn't until this grown age that I'm like figuring out a lot of the shit I did that was, we'll cover it up and say like, oh, it's just, young player shit.
Is it because you think your parents didn't know what you were doing because they just believed you were so good? Or that they knew and kind of were like, oh, he's a man. And didn't hold you accountable for it? I think
a big part of that is the man part, right? Not holding men accountable, especially like Caribbean families. The men can do no wrong. You're supposed to have Linda, Felicia, Dawn, LaShawn. Okay. But I do think there's a part of it where it's like, if they really knew, like if I was really having those conversations with my mom, like if Eli came to you and told you half the shit I was doing, you would be like, whoa, we need to get you a therapist.
But this is two different generations.
But I'm saying like even now, like
so you feel like part of it is that they didn't know. They were oblivious to it.
Yeah. And part of it is the machismo.
Okay. So that's two different types of traumas that you just brought up. One is you were on this pedestal of being so good that you kind of in a way were neglected, right? And that left room for you to be mischievous, right? The other one is the superiority of being a man, and like your womanizing ways is kind of defended or kind of ignored.
Yeah.
So you were able to do it. So no accountability, right? In the book, the one with no accountability, the example was like this kid came home with a bad grade and his dad told him, oh, that teacher's stupid. So that led him to think like, fuck these teachers. Like, I don't have no accountability. I'm smarter than them. So it sounds like harsh to be like, well, that's two types of traumas. Because then it sounds like you're attacking your parents. But it's just the culture has shifted. And at the time, it just seemed like the right thing to do.
It's kind of like, was it like 2 episodes ago when we talked about that? Did you know with the giving the baby some sunshine,
some light with the cage out the window? Like, I don't think your parents were like, I'm fucking him up, I'm giving him trauma. It's just not realizing. And also, we live in a society that's very individualistic. So we weren't raised to think about how we show up in relationships. We were raised to like you said, help those who help themselves. Like, it's very individual. So they didn't realize what was happening.
Do you think the largest, how do I want to say this, like the blunt of trauma happens in childhood, or do you think that's something that could just keep adding on? Like, you're 18, you're still adding on to your trauma?
So I think childhood, the relational trauma is built, right? Because we're developing, our brain's literally developing, right? And different parts of our brains do different things, right? And if, I don't know the right terms, but let's say there's one part of our brain that helps us feel safe, is going through a lot of shit while we're young, it's going to be dominant in our brain, causing us to be anxious. You know what I'm saying? So I think our relational trauma happens in childhood, but other types of trauma can still happen all the time, like a car accident, going to the war, a loss, abuse in an adult relationship can cause and lead to more trauma. But those founding years, those formational years are so important. And I think focusing on relationships, this book talks about that. Like, it's so important. Yeah. Moving away from individualism and seeing ourselves as part of a society, as a family, as needing each other, can really like lower the amount of trauma that we have.
Yeah.
All right. So that was deep. I have a couple Post-its here because I wanted to read a couple quotes. So let me just read them before I go on. Here, there's a list that kind of compares the adaptive child versus the wise adult. So I'm going to go back and forth. The first one is adaptive child. The second one is a wise adult. Black and white versus nuanced. So your adaptive child is like, it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Our wise adult self says, wait, it can't just be right or wrong. Your experiences matter. Your understanding, your perspective is nuanced. We talk about nuances so much on this episode, on this podcast. Perfectionism versus realistic. Relentless versus forgiving. Rigid versus flexible. Harsh versus warm. Hard versus yielding. Certain versus humble. Tight in body versus relaxed in body. So I feel like the wise adult kind of reminds me of the innocence of inner childhood, whereas the adaptive child is like who we had to be to survive our trauma.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
The last quote I wanted to read was, I feel like a lot of people write to us and a lot of fear and anxiety in relationships revolves around the fear of being abandoned, right? And it's probably because our childhood, and it's also probably because of the narrative that's pushed in society and the media of like your partner cheating and leaving and all this stuff and like not liking you anymore after you're married. So the quote says, abandonment is a child ego state. Adults don't get abandoned. Adults get left, or even if you want, rejected, but they survived. Abandoned means if you leave me, I die. Children get abandoned. When you feel that petrified, desperate feeling, you are no longer in your adult self. You are in a child ego state.
That's deep. That's deep.
And it reminds me of when I say, like, what's the worst that can happen? If someone cheats on you, if someone leaves you, you're not going to die. You're okay. You can recover. And I think when we remember that and we give ourselves the accountability of healing ourselves, we can be less anxious in our relationships.
But it also, like, if you do have that fear of abandonment, then there's something there that you need to address, because that means your immediate connection to being left is you're abandoning me.
I'm going to die.
And
if children are neglected, they can't eat. They won't survive. I'm an adult. If I'm left or rejected, I will be okay. And a lot of times when we have that fears because of childhood fears that don't make any sense in our adult lives, right? And it's not on our partner to make us feel secure 100%. Yes, of course, the relational aspect, the things, their behaviors help us feel secure.
I think that's supposed to happen naturally.
Yes, but in terms of that deep-rooted fear of abandonment, that's a you thing that you have to work on.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. All right, we were on that a lot. This book, like, I've been reading through it crazy. I've read the first 5 chapters in a week, and that might not be a lot for some people, but reading and consistently reading for me has been a struggle.
I know it's good because I'll just hear her going, ooh. Damn. Oh, baby, come listen to this. Listen to this.
And I read him quotes and stuff.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. So this perfectly leads into another topic that was submitted by just another listener. She's not a patron, but she left me a DM, and I'm not going to say their name because I didn't ask for permission. But it's a very important question that relates to intentional parenting and gentle parenting. Are we prepared for our kids to talk about where we fucked up at? The same way we talk about where our parents fucked up? If they have some negative outcome, are we prepared to receive that criticism, feedback from our children when we're so focused on trying to be better parents than our parents? I'm sure our parents thought that they were doing the right things for us compared to how their parents parented them. How are we preparing to handle that?
I am not ready for that. I think about that often. You've all even seen me here cry about my thought process here with, things that I may have done wrong when it comes to Eli. Mm-hmm. So, my hope is that I do enough that the moments where I think I didn't, we're not having conversations when he's a grown man and I'm having to face that. But, it's just I have to be open to those conversations. I think there are conversations I wish I could have with my father that were kind of like, we're playing nice and we're not really addressing them, or when we do, there's no follow-up. And I want to do better than that.
Yeah, I agree with that part. The communication, right? We talk about how important communication is to help rebuild or build or improve our intimate relationships. I want to have really open and clear communication with my kids so that when they do feel like, oh, I kind of wish this was different, they could talk to me about it.
Yeah.
Am I 100% going to be okay and be like, oh, yeah, I fucked up? We might disagree, right? It might hurt. I might feel like defensive. And it has happened. We shared a story on Patreon. Basically, something happened. If you go on Patreon, it's there. But Eli said he was scared. And it triggered me because what are you scared of, bro? Like, I got my ass beat as a kid. What you scared of? And that was my ego. I was on the defense. I was triggered because it's like, I'm working so hard. Not
to put hands on your kids.
Yeah. So what do you mean you're scared, right? But when I relaxed and calmed down and thought with my wise adult brain and not my adaptive child brain, I realized that, one, he's 8 and doesn't have the right vocabulary to explain exactly what he felt. It wasn't really fear of like being hurt, but more so like
fear of consequences.
Reluctancy to kind of admit what happened. So I'm already learning those lessons and encountering when my kid kind of, Eli has said to me, "Oh, are you going to be that mom?" Because I want to clean the crust off his eye in the morning. So there are already ways that like he's, what's the word? That he's kind of like
pushing back or
pushing the boundaries and asserting himself as an individual, And I don't think it's wrong. I think as long as I'm comfortable with the communication, we'll be fine. And like I said, I talk about my childhood and these things I wish were different, but I don't resent my mom, right? I give her grace because of that, because what about her childhood and the one before that? Like, I know it's cycles that have to be broken and life experiences that were probably unique to her that she had to figure it out on her own.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is that, we're trying to do things different / better than our parents. And we're going to fumble. We're going to stumble. We're going to fumble the bag. We're going to do all that. And like you said, the main thing is that when we do, and if it shows up in our children's young adult life, their adult life, we have to be open to those conversations. I think that should be the ultimate difference between like maybe what our parents aren't doing for us currently that we could do for our children. Our goal shouldn't be that we're going to be perfect. But our goal should be that when there's probably something we're doing now that we're not even aware of, right? And then when Eli's 21 and wants to have a conversation about it, me and you were looking at each other like, what?
Just like I got upset when he said he was scared.
But our reaction to that should be like, wow, like maybe stunned, but willing to have that conversation. And I think that should be the goal, that you're never going to get it perfect.
And another thing is, I want him to know about our childhoods. Like, we have those jokes of our generation being like, I used to walk 20 miles to school, or I had to do X, Y, and Z. And they kind of throw things in your face to kind of make you feel guilt or ungrateful. I want him to know about my childhood more so he can understand how I show up and why, And I feel like I want to have conversations about the mother I was at 23 when I had Eli versus the mother I was when I was 32 and had River. Like, those are conversations I want to be able to have without guilt, and I want to be met with grace.
Yeah.
And am I 100% ready? No, but I think we're building the foundations to be ready when it happens, because I think it's inevitable.
Why do you think our parents are so reluctant to have those conversations?
Because they never had them, and their childhood's probably way more traumatic than ours. And I think their adaptive child is life goes on. They bury things, and you're fine. I figured it out, so he could figure it out. If I dealt with my trauma and I'm working and loving and I have a relationship with my daughter now, I don't need to dig up those wounds and talk about it. Like, I feel like to them, that's making it worse. That's like, I worked so hard to kind of shove that down. At least I think that's what it is for my mom.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating on my part. It's because both my parents are Caribbean, but they're still like Americanized, right? So it's like I give them grace, but it's like you also have the tools. Because sometimes it's like we have like these immigrant parents. It's like you get it, but in my case, it's like, what's your excuse?
I disagree, only because we're also in a generation where we have social media, the internet. All of this information is coming from all over the country, whereas our parents had the people close to them who had the same kind of trauma, who had the same type of adaptive child. So they're reinforcing each other, right? they have conversations with their friend, like, could you believe my kid feels this? And they're like bigging each other up. And it's hard to escape that pattern when everyone around you is doing the same shit.
Yeah.
When I talk about people, like friends I have that are trying to gentle parent or change the narrative and, you know, break these generational cycles, they're like not the people who like live near me on my block. They're like from all over the place, right? That we connected through social media. And I built a community because of this device that our parents didn't have.
Yeah. It's allowed you to like open your mind to new ways of thinking. Whereas if you were just focused on the people in your
immediate community, y'all all repeating the same shit over and over. Which is why even like at 16, I got an opportunity to go to South Korea with kids from different high schools. And I have friends that went to high school in Long Island and went to high school X, Y, and Z. And it just opened my perspective, right? And everybody else in my school didn't have that opportunity to just see the world from a different lens. And I feel like we need to give our parents grace that they didn't have access to information in the way that we have it.
Yeah, I think that's also why at a young age, I leaned so much into like the internet, even video games. Like I was very big into MMOs, which is like stands for massive multiplayer, MMORPG, massive multiplayer online role-playing game. But with that,
you just nerded out really hard right now.
Well, with that, there's a lot of communication. Like you're using the chat feature a lot, and you're connecting with people from all over the world, people who have different mindsets. If I open that door outside my room, it's just a lot of people thinking the same
shit. And even when I talk about like Dominican culture, anti-blackness, all my Dominican friends in New Paltz taking Black Studies classes, and it's like, oh, we get it. We're woke now. We get it. We went home.
You know, Black.
We had to either fight or choose peace and be like, let them talk their shit. Because what you gonna do? Live in chaos and you trying to convince people all the time, you know? And there was a time when I felt like it was my responsibility to change the minds of like my anti-Black family and friends back in New York. And then I got older and wiser, and I'm like, you know what? They have years and years of conditioning to think this way. Like, I'm not going to stress myself. I'm going to find a different community.
Yeah. And you probably, and I'm sure without knowing it, you planted the seed for a lot of people.
Yeah, of course. But I also took off that burden of feeling like it was my responsibility. Like I had to do it.
Captain Save-A-Ho.
Yeah. Like, no, it's too much. It's a headache, right? So yeah, that was a lot.
The inner child.
Yeah, talking about childhoods and parenting, adoptive child.
I know that when we were gonna be talking about this subject, I was like, I'm gonna cry.
You didn't cry.
I'm actively like,
I know. I saw it once.
I'm like, let me keep that down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, there's always we all have shit. And I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation is that I want to be able to just have those conversations with our kids and not have them feel how I feel right now in this moment.
Yeah. I love you.
I love you more. Thank you all for listening this long. If you have on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review.
5-star rating.
If you're on YouTube, hit that like, leave us a comment, let us know what you thought.
Yes, our last video is doing so good. The engagement is really helping us, so we appreciate it. The
engagement helps us brings this show to new listeners, new viewers, so we appreciate you guys doing your part.
Yeah, being in Florida, Mercury being in reggaeton, we didn't even promote our last episode. Like, we don't have any clips for it. And it's still outperforming a lot of our other episodes. So we really think that your engagement is helping us. So we appreciate it. Share this with someone who you think might relate or can relate or should relate. And yeah. And
if you want some more from us, we're going to be having bonus episode on Patreon this week. Probably come out tomorrow or Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want some more, patreon.com/we still like each other. All the links will be in the description. Thank you all. My love.
Daddy.
Hear the baby crying in the back?
Yeah.
We got to hurry up. But Do you still like me?
I still like you.
I love you so much.
I love you more.
Peace, y'all.
Peace.